We interrupt this travelogue to show a few of the parties that Mom and Dad gave over the years. The folks entertained frequently. Sometimes the parties had themes. Space does not permit going into all of them. A few, however, should be noted. One of the funniest events was the justly famous Kitty Party of 1947. This picture shows Charlotte Levy and Dr. Doug Kramer. That's scotch in the baby bottle. Here is Dad with Doug's wife Maggie. Very few, if any, of the friends ever held theme parties such that Dad's creative parties became noteworthy in their social circle. I picked up the concept of theme parties, but until I retired and ran them here in Palm Beach, they were never as successful as Dad's were. Dad held 2 Roaring Twenties parties. The first was in December of 1953. Mother did a mean Charleston, and that was probably the motivation for this particular theme. The cartoon car behind which photos were taken was retained in the cellar of 730 Sherman Avenue for many years. Notice that Mom is holding a cigarette in a holder in this shot. Yup, she was a smoker in those years. She gave up the habit cold turkey in 1957 after a bout with pleurisy. It was the aforementioned Dr. Kramer who said it was either cigarettes or death. Mom dropped the weed. Fast forward to 1962 and a second 20s party. It is another picture of the Kramers. I included this shot for another small point that the slide collection review revealed. Notice the Greek letters Phi Sigma Delta on the cartoon car. I was at Syracuse University at the time and was a member of Phi Sigma Delta fraternity. I never noticed that this carried back to my father's parties. I cannot resist this marvelous picture of Mom and Dad. This chapter is getting quite long, and there are many more images to display, but this one just had to make the cut. While technically not one of Dad's parties, these outfits were constructed by Dad for a costume party given by the Raritan Yacht Club in 1953. He labored for hours in building these robots out of cardboard boxes and sheets of cardboard sea flute. The picture is out of focus in the slide, so I doubt you can see that the eyes are light bulbs that were activated by copper contacts in the gloves. In addition, there was a buzzer which was also controlled by the glove contacts. As promised, we will now focus on family ski trips. The first trip I went on to Woodbound Inn was February 1952. It was just Dad and me, as Mother got sick and Dad couldn't handle Steve without Mom. I got to take a week off from school, which was highly irregular. The one stipulation was I had to keep up with my schoolwork. That was mainly learning the multiplication tables. Always weak in memorization, this proved to be a difficult chore. But skiing with Dad more than compensated for the study hall. The slope, as I have noted earlier, was modest at best. Here I am at the top, with the inn in the background. You can see that controlled skiing was not my thing in those years. In fact, it would be 10 years later that I would learn to make a decent parallel turn. In 1952, it was the famous snowplow turn for me, followed by a few years later by the stem Christie. Food at the inn was out of this world. I had my first breakfast sausage here, as Mother would not have that delicacy in the house. It seems that Grandpa Max, the wholesale butcher, believed that sausage of any kind was garbage and not fit for human consumption. The following year, Mom and Steve were on hand to partake of the joys of Woodbound Inn, and many joys there were to be had. For the adults, there was hot buttered rum. Each of the inn's good old boys got a beer stein full of rum, butter, and a small amount of water. Ed Brummer would come around and plunge a red-hot poker into the stein, heating same. All of the guests could participate in the outdoor barbecue Ed gave once every ski week. Bearskin robes were tossed on piles of snow. This was the seating plan for 50 or so guests. Notice the green tag on Steve's jacket. That was the lift ticket. Since skiing was only modest at the inn, we took a day trip over to Mount Sunapee. Here was a real lift, and the first chairlift I ever rode. Over the years, I have returned to Sunapee many times. The skiing is great, and the views are terrific, at least for eastern skiing. The only thing that has changed over the years is this lift has been replaced by a high-speed quad. We left the inn on Sunday of our midwinter vacation and drove across New Hampshire and Vermont from east to west. This was no easy task in those days. Mid-morning we stopped at Hogback Ski Area. This was unusual because the access road ended at the top of the slope instead of the bottom. They had a T-bar lift that I found a challenge to ride. Sadly, Hogback is one of the lost ski areas noted in the website nelsap.org/vt/hogback.html. After a day of skiing, Dad drove the trusty Oldsmobile back to Plainfield while I drifted off to sleep. By 1955, Woodbound was just too far from real skiing, so Dad gave up the Dartmouth camaraderie for good skiing. That year we went to a place called The Keens. The Keens were located outside of Hanover, New Hampshire, so Dad was a whole lot closer to Dartmouth College, if not the Buddies. It too was an inn, like Woodbound, but its attached slope was much bigger. Additionally, it was close to the more challenging White Mountains of New Hampshire. This shot shows Steve in the snow with no sign of his skis, but wearing ski boots. I can only assume he is taking a break. I cannot recall what mountain we tackled, but it might have been Cannon, since it was the principal big ski area in northern New Hampshire. In the image, you can clearly discern that even the attached slope to the Keens was a whole lot bigger than poor old Woodbound Inn. I seem to remember that meals at the Keens were served just at breakfast. Since many days we were off at some other site, lunch was usually a burger served slopeside. For dinner, we probably ate at some restaurant in nearby Hanover.